Hello again, students. In today's discussion of the United States during World War II, we're going to focus on the Holocaust. And as this is a U.S. history class, we want to look at some of the American influences as well as response to the tragedy. The Holocaust is rooted in some long-standing anti-Semitism. Adolf Hitler does not invent this. He does not create this out of whole cloth. And many of the conspiracies that he espoused about Jews and others were long established in European thought. The Holocaust was also influenced by more recent ideas, pseudosciences such as social Darwinism and eugenics, which both find their roots in the United States. And not surprisingly, this will influence anti-Semitic and racist ideas because as a pseudoscience, it was sort of created to justify pre-existing racism and anti-Semitism, which is how you know it is bad science. The Nazis considered the Aryan, which is white people of Germanic, Anglo-Saxon, or Nordic ancestry to be the genetically superior races, and groups like Slavs and Jews to be the inferior ones, scientifically within this eugenicist sort of social Darwinist worldview. And for Hitler, Jews offered, the idea of a Jewish conspiracy offered a simple solution to complex problems. After World War I, Germany was in bad shape, and rather than addressing the multiple issues that were plaguing the country, instead it was easier just to say that it was all part of some grand conspiracy, the famous sort of stab in the back theory that was held by many German military leaders after World War I, that they were the military would have won the war, but they were stabbed in the back by the leftists, the social democrats, the communists, etc. And at the heart of all this, they believed was some sort of Jewish conspiracy. In 1933, when Hitler became chancellor, he starts to put some of these ideas into the works. He urged Germans to boycott Jewish businesses, and he started banning Jews from certain specific jobs like in the civil service, law, medicine, finance, and so forth. In 1935, the Nazis will pass the Nuremberg laws, putting severe restrictions and segregating Jewish people in all levels of German society, denying citizenship to Jewish people, and forbidding marriage between Jews and non-Jews. And I did say segregation. This is another area where America influences the events in Germany. Hitler and the other Nazi leaders looked to the U.S. Jim Crow laws as sort of an example of how to set up a society where they relegate the Jews to sort of a second-class, bottom-rung citizenship. And throughout all of this, the Nazis are spreading anti-Semitic propaganda through the newspapers and media, and also through the schools and what lessons were taught to children. This picture here is the cover of a book called The Poison Mushroom. It's a children's book that was published in Germany in the 1930s, where it basically compares Jewish people to dangerous fungi. And this is all part of sort of the dual concept that the Jews were both dangerous and inferior and subhuman. Kristallnacht, or the Night of Broken Glass, in Germany, was a large-scale coordinated attack on Jewish homes, businesses, and places of worship. It was sparked by it was actually a planned attack, but the impetus, the excuse that was used by the Nazis was the killing of a German diplomat in Paris by a young Jewish refugee. And the Nazis then ordered these attacks on Jews. They destroyed 1,500 synagogues, places of worship for Jewish people, 7,500 Jewish-owned businesses, like we see in the picture here, and 200 were killed, 600 injured, and thousands were arrested, Jewish people arrested in the wake of the violence against them. Kristallnacht, among the other early signs, was an indication for many Jewish people that they needed to get out of Germany, and many fled. But the problem was that there were many countries would not take them in. This was during the Great Depression, and for the United States and many other countries, they were more concerned with their economic problems and worried about bringing in additional people when we have a very high unemployment rate, as well as our very restrictive 1920s immigration laws that set quotas would only allow certain numbers of people in, many of whom were Jewish people who were blocked from coming into the United States. An example of this were the 900 Jews who arrived in Cuba on the ocean liner, the St. Louis, seeking refuge. And 22 of them were taken in by Cuba, and the United States took in none of them. And later on, it would be assessed that about 600 of those 900 will die in the Holocaust. The so-called final solution to the Nazis' Jewish question was systematic extermination. Although the Nazis didn't just target Jewish people, they targeted Poles, Slavs, Roma, Jehovah's Witnesses, members of the LGBTQ community, the physically disabled, mentally disabled, and mentally ill, alcoholics, beggars, political opponents such as socialists and communists, and many, many more that the Nazis often referred to as useless eaters, people who did not contribute to society in their mind. As laid out in Mein Kampf, Hitler pushed for what he called Lebensraum, or living space for the Germans. That was the motivation for the conquest of places like Poland, that they would replace the people already living there with Germans, and then the people there would be used as slaves and eventually worked to death until they were eliminated. The first of the concentration camps to open was Dachau in 1933, and it was a prison camp. It was designed to turn prisoners into what they called useful members of society and basically use them as forced slave labor and also the subjects of horrible medical experiments. Jewish people in occupied Poland, as seen in this picture here, were rounded up and forced into ghettos at first, walled areas of the cities like Warsaw, before eventually being shipped off to concentration camps later on. What were known as action groups followed the German army as it conquered, and they would shoot Jews and other undesirables, as they called them, and bury them in the ditches as they went. But all of this was not eliminating the people at the rate that the Nazis wanted to see happen. So at the Wannsee Conference, the SS leader Heydrich proposed a plan to exterminate up to 11 million Jewish people within Nazi-controlled territory in 1942. And this will lead to the conversion of such camps as Auschwitz, seen here, the gates of which seen here, into death camps, and rather than just being work camps. And Auschwitz was connected to a work camp, but there was also the death camps whose entire goal was to exterminate the people brought to them. Trains would bring prisoners from all over the German-controlled territory to these death camps, where they would be killed in gas chambers, where they would pump in carbon monoxide or Zyklon B, a pesticide gas used to kill bugs on plants, now used to kill people. All their valuables were taken from them, and anything of value in their physical bodies might be harvested: human fat for making soap, hair for wigs or stuffing mattresses, the gold fillings, etc. And then the bodies were destroyed in crematoriums that ran sometimes at all hours, sending a sick black smoke and ash into the air as a way of disposing of the bodies, but also of covering up what they knew to be criminal activity. The Allied response to the Holocaust can kind of be summed up as too little, too late, waiting too long to take action, and not really doing enough to stop the Holocaust. And historians have blamed a lot of this, in the United States in particular, on, dealing with the Great Depression and our restrictive immigration laws, as I had said before, but also with anti-Semitism in the United States, as well as apathy towards the suffering of others, and just sort of an underestimation of Hitler's intentions or the scope of what he was doing. But by 1942, it was becoming pretty obvious what was going on. In 1943, British and American officials hosted a Bermuda conference to discuss how to deal with the problem and to take in refugees, but no concrete solutions were created for this. The following year, 1944, Franklin Roosevelt will establish the War Refugee Board, which will work with the Red Cross to eventually save thousands of Jews from mostly Romania and Hungary. On the other side of things, Stalin, as head of the USSR, showed very little interest in helping out the Jewish people and probably was just as happy to see them exterminated as the Nazis were. And when pushed by groups to help out or help stop what was going on, the U.S. and British military responded that these were not military targets and they had to focus their resources primarily on winning the war, and not divert them to doing things like liberating these camps. And of course, the Allies didn't do enough to pressure other countries' leaders who were within the German sphere of influence to stop them from shipping their Jewish population into Germany and Poland to these death camps. And many, again, anti-Semitism was common in Europe, and many of them may have been supporters of getting rid of their Jewish population, regardless of what, although some notable places like Holland refused the order to do so, to ship out the Jewish population. When U.S. and Soviet soldiers, the Soviets originally and then the United States and Britain, started liberating these camps and saw firsthand the horrors of what was being perpetrated, and it was brought back home, there was then an outpouring of sympathy from the United States, and many Jewish refugees would find at least temporary, if not permanent, homes in the United States afterwards. And in response to the Holocaust, Britain, the United States, and other nations will officially recognize a Jewish homeland, independent homeland in what was then Palestine in the Middle East, and today is Israel. When we look at the graphic organizer for this assignment, it's just sort of a timeline of key events in the Holocaust, and what I'm asking you to do is to explain them or describe what happened with each of these events. They do not necessarily go in order on the outline, so you might want to go back through and make sure you're getting them correctly in order here. As an example, we look at Hitler rising to power in 1933, and what this looks like. He urged Germans to boycott Jewish businesses, ban them from certain occupations, and so forth. On a final note, a lot of you guys, of course, will say, we learn about the Holocaust a lot, and it seems to be a thing that is brought up every year. And in response to that, I would just point out that the Nazi propaganda minister, Joseph Goebbels, said that a lie repeated enough times becomes the truth. And I'm hoping that the remedy to that problem is to repeat the truth enough times that it overcomes the lie. I love you. Bye-bye.